Welcome to FDA Imports, cross-border compliance with attorney Benjamin L. England.
Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of FDA Imports, cross-border compliance with attorney Benjamin L. England. I am your host, Mike Leon. Ben here is the founder of FDAImports.com. He's a former FDA regulatory counsel who now helps companies around the world navigate the complex intersection of FDA oversight, customs enforcement, and international trade. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the federal government shutdown, which is, as of this recording, still happening. It's affected the FDA and CBP's border operations for screening, inspecting, and most importantly, released imported cargo, as well as delays in agency reviews of necessary submissions of detentions, import alerts, petitions, recessions of refusals, and customs cases. So, Ben, good to see you. A lot there, a mouthful there, as you can tell. The government shutdown is still happening as of this recording. It's been about maybe 4 weeks or so. Is the FDA working? Is anyone checked on the imported foods or drugs? How is this happening? Take us through how this is still happening with the government being shut down.
All right. So I when I was at the FDA, I went through a number of these. It's not that uncommon. Even though people talk about it like it's the next the next shutdown of the world, and the FDA space and customs, which we'll talk about primarily, but this is true for USDA too. FDA is running at about 86% capacity, so it's actually largely running. And if you think of it, it's because so much of what FDA does is driven by user fees, things like FDA approvals for drugs, for medical devices. That's all paid for by industry. So it's not coming out of the general fund. It doesn't come out of appropriations. That money is actually paid by companies when they make application for approvals. And so FDA has a lot of those people that are still working full time. The compliance functions of those activities are also operating, and that's the interface with the import enforcement or even domestic enforcement. So the compliance people are working at the FDA for the most part. On the import side, imports has always been essential with respect to the FDA activity, and that makes sense given the fact that such a significant portion of FDA's inventory, right? The companies and the products and the sheer volume of trade is imported into the United States. And so so even though there are right now probably very few domestic inspections that are being conducted, and probably very few foreign inspections, as in like going into facilities, crossing the threshold is what we would call that in the agency, right? Walking across the threshold of a facility. That probably is happening only in the circumstances where there may have been where there's some adverse event or there's some sort of an outbreak, or there's some need for a recall. In other words, there's a sort of a significant safety issue that's arisen. Those will be covered, but routine inspections not. At the border, yes. Foods, cosmetics, drugs, medical devices. So the FDA does have its inspectors at the border. The compliance people are working as well. But they're primarily focusing on the highest risk types of issues, types of activities.
So Ben, it funnels into the follow-up perfectly, because break down what kind of cases right now are getting priority. I hope that companies don't think it's time to sneak something in, for sure.
Yeah, good observation. No, this would be the wrong time to do that. And it's because the majority of the FDA import people are working. Customs, which is also has most of their staff working. So the screening happens electronically. So trying to sneak something in, you'd be running against the same sort of risk than you would, even if the government was fully operational. That's how the government ordinarily catches things initially, is by the electronic screening. FDA's resources right now, though, if you sort of break down the agency's various industry sectors, human foods, relatively high risk when it comes to ready-to-eat products. Right, products that if they were contaminated would likely cause some sort of illness because there's no processing step that happens by the time the consumer is purchasing it. Right, you go to the store, you buy it, and you could eat it in your car if you want. That's ready to eat. So those types of foods are going to be examined. You're going to see most seafood is still going to be high risk. Right now, there's a lot of concern about seafood that has been found be contaminated with cesium-137, which is a radioactive compound. You may not have seen that in the news, but FDA is targeting a lot of seafood industry right now. The seafood industry looking for shipments that may be contaminated with irradiation, and have been finding them. And that's isolated to a particular area. It's not like all seafood coming in. But that's an example of the agency interacting and reacting in spite of the fact that there's been a shutdown. So the human food space, you'll see plenty of activity. The FDA actually creates a risk matrix internally for its own staff that prioritizes products based upon safety risk. So usually that's going to be micro contamination, things like salmonella, listeria, E. coli that could be in foods, or could be in pharmaceuticals, or it could be in cosmetics. That's where you would usually find that risk. So FDA sampling for that kind of stuff is still happening. In the drug space, for the most part, FDA is still operating its inspection requirements for imported drugs, because so many of those are going into an FDA-approved manufacturing activity, right? So, like the new drug approval process, those active ingredients ordinarily are coming from overseas. So, they can't not allow that through, or the drug companies can't make their drugs. But contrast that with animal foods. The FDA is pretty low risk in animal food. It considers that to be relatively low risk, and it's largely because the safety components are on the lower side, unless it's microbiological contamination, particularly with retail, say, pet food. Right, retail pet food is still considered to be relatively high risk, because you touch it with your hands a lot of times when you're feeding your dogs and your cats. If it's a pet chew, or it's toys, or it's or it's food, it's food, you're scooping it out and you're putting it in. Your hand is touching the food, and then you have a big cross-contamination risk. USDA is their inspection activities are actually run by Customs. So Customs always performs the USDA inspection. So to the extent that USDA is not operating, in fact, they're operating because they do mandatory inspections of meat packing and slaughterhouse and meat production facilities in the United States. So those are considered continuous inspections. And so there's always somebody there, or else the facility can't operate. So it's a mandatory inspection, 100% inspection during operation. The things that are not happening, cosmetics, less cosmetic inspections for like color additives. They're doing a lot of label exams because it's cheap. So FDA is trying to stay busy. And so FDA is doing a lot of examinations of imported labeling in order to make sure that people aren't making mistakes there. They don't have the resources to do the sampling and the testing, and so they're primarily focusing on those kinds of easy examinations.
Let me ask you then, and that's a good explainer that you gave on these various product categories that the FDA is regulating, how it's handling all of this. But what can companies do if they don't hear? They're not getting responses from the FDA or Customs Border Patrol. What would you recommend to them, or what can companies do in that situation?
That's a good question. A lot of times, if the FDA decides, if something goes on hold, it's usually being put on hold by the system, by the computer system. Now, I would expect that lower risk products are going to be held at a lower percentage hit rate than they would have if the government wasn't shut down. In other words, that's one of the ways that they're reducing the workflow, is by reducing the screening rates for lower risk products, which means that there's actually a higher chance that higher risk products are going to be examined, right? Because the government has sort of cut out the review process, well, not cut it out, but they've cut out the physical exam rates for lower risk products. So the chance of FDA examining a higher risk product is actually higher during a shutdown in the United States. And so what happens is then the system will say the government wants to see it, and then they expect you to submit information to the government, and then you do, and the first thing you get is an autoresponder that says, please be patient with us. The government is shut down, and consequently, it could take us several days or a week to get back to you. And so the government already takes you a couple of days to a week to get back to you. So when they're telling you it's going to be a couple of days in a week, it's going to be a couple of weeks. And so that's very problematic. So what they should be doing is they really do need to get on the phone. They need to make telephone calls and do some emailing to make sure that they're getting some interaction. If it doesn't fall in the high risk category in the government's matrix, they're going to tell you, right? They're just going to say, listen, our resources are dedicated to dealing with the highest risk food safety, cosmetic safety, drug safety issues, and yours doesn't fall into that category, so it doesn't warrant expedited review. Expedited as in we're going to review it in spite of the shutdown. And so you're just going to have to wait. And sometimes I can push through that, and sometimes I can't. If I can make the argument that well, what you're doing functionally at government is you're detaining or you're stopping my cargo. It's a functional equivalent of a detention without making a charge, which the government's not allowed to do. So sometimes I'm able to sort of overcome that. And I've had a couple of cases where the compliance officer has said, it's interesting. I just went back and talked to my supervisor, and they agree this is a higher risk case, so we're going to go ahead and pick it up. Now, it's exactly the same thing it was when it came the first time. But right, so you learn how to sort of communicate with the agency. But if you don't communicate with them, you're going to be waiting.
Well, I want to stay on something you said there about low risk or the high risk ones. What about like these serious health emergencies or products related to that? Or how are those being handled in terms of, you just mentioned about the vetting process and screening process, but serious health emergencies related to imported products, how's that being handled?
Well, so if the product's already in the country, then the government has a couple of options. One is to use the enforcement tools, the border enforcement tools that it has to try to claw product back, and they're actually using customs authorities when they do that. The other thing is that the government can send out inspectors in order to do tracebacks and track the food or track the product, and determine where it went in distribution, but also determine where it came from. And that is going on still. Those are epidemiological studies. Basically, it's nothing more than following the product through the supply chain. And they are still continuing to do that because that would be considered essential work. Where the government knows that there's a cesium-137 is a good example in the seafood. That's a food safety risk. Now it's a relatively small slice of regulated industry, but it covers things like shrimp and crab and lobster and some pretty expensive seafood. That it turns out we import a lot of in order to fulfill the demand. So the government is stopping that cargo, and they're doing small portions of sampling in order to run it for the cesium-137 and then try to clear the cargo if it comes back negative. But the government is remaining responsive to those things, and a lot of these employees they're not being paid. Now they will get paid. I've never been in a situation where the government employees did not get paid unless they quit in the meantime. Now we do have the oddity this time where the government is actually releasing people. They're actually firing people because and they're using that as an excuse. I've never seen that happen before. That's the first time I've seen that. But many of these employees, they believe in the mission. They believe in what they're doing. They hate working for free. And they want this thing to finish as quickly as possible, and they'll tolerate as much as they can until they can't. And so that means that we're going to continue to have people working on it, but it's hard on them.
Well, let's talk about, you talked about FDA. Let's talk about the other agency that you mentioned with CBP. And I know you mentioned there are still people working, and obviously some are not getting paid or they get back pay, whatever. But talk a little bit about the delays process there with respect to inspections or seizures, or even joint FDA, USDA cases that are involving CBP right now.
So CBP is an agency that is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. CBP is operating, I'm not sure, that wouldn't be 100%, but they're operating higher than 86%, which FDA is already very high in terms of its operating force during a shutdown. So most of customs, in the border area where you would see it slow down is going to be in the cases like where FDA refuses something and someone fails to redeliver it, they fail to export or destroy the cargo, that becomes a customs case. It's a customs case for damages, for money. The folks who run those cases is going to be they're running on a skeleton crew. So those cases have stalled. But there's no real time frame on it from the customs side. Like, it doesn't matter how long it takes customs to get around to doing the next step. I've had cases last for 2 and 3 years before, because the government's busy. So it doesn't impact customs really that much. They'll just get the money later. But their inspection side is operating, I would expect, at practically speaking, full tilt. Where you might see some breakdown in terms of the inspection is going to be things like violations like intellectual property rights violations, right? People that are violating trademark or patent laws. Yes, we don't want that, but it's not running guns and running dope and running people, and it's not it's not FDA USDA regulated product that could cause harm like that. So they've done their own breaking down of the risk, but most of customs operation is still operational.
Ben, as we wrap here on this episode, so government reopens. I said it's shut down as of this recording, but it reopens. What should importers, foreign exporters out there expect once the government does reopen?
It takes a while for the government to catch up. They have to. There's a backlog, and this is particularly true where the operation doesn't include something that was happening at the border, or something that was happening in, say, in an enforcement realm, like a recall or something, because that is actually process. Those are being processed. So anything that was considered low risk activity hasn't been done, and yet it's still important activity, and so the government still has to do it, and it's just been backing up, and so there's going to continue to be delay for a period of time while the government is clearing out that backlog. I also expect that there's going to be less people coming back to work than left, right, under the original shutdown, the RIF. So I expect that there's going to be a number of people who've decided to look for other work and won't be coming back. So there'll be some vacancies. Now, there's different people have different thoughts about that, but when it comes to the government doing its job and you interacting with the agency, it's going to slow things down. It's going to keep this delay longer than just the shutdown occurring. So I would expect anything where you submitted something to the government that already takes some time to look through, getting it done before the shutdown is over is itself going to be a challenge. But before it's shut down, before it's opened back up, that itself is a challenge. But after it's shut down, it's going to remain a challenge. It's going to take time. And again, the squeakiest wheel is usually going to get the grease. It's really important to make yourself heard and to speak up. And now, your customs brokers won't want to do this. And I'm not meaning to sort of like ostracize customs brokers. And there's some probably watching this. The reason that they don't usually like to push too hard is because they have to deal with these agencies every single day, whereas the importers only deal with them when they bring something in, right? And so the importer says, well, go do something about it. And the broker's like, I already notified them. Let's give FDA or customs the opportunity to react. Hiring somebody like me is hiring somebody that the government knows my job is to be a squeaky wheel, right? And I don't deal with the agency every day, so I don't carry some of those risks that the brokers do. So we usually are able to get someone's attention and at least speak to it, to tell us what it is that they're expecting and what do they expect to do. But it's going to continue to be a bit of a delay because they have to catch up.
Yeah, Ben, thank you as always for the time and insights on this. Truly appreciate it.
Yep, good to see you, Mike. Thanks.
And thank you to everybody out there for joining us on this episode of FDA Imports Cross-Border Compliance. If your business right now is navigating the FDA or customs review process, you want to know how new data screening systems could affect your shipments or the government shutdown can impact you, do me a favor, visit FDAImports.com right now to connect with Ben and the team. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review and comment, or share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. As always, I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.